My name is Ricky Ott, and I direct Ultimate Civics, a project of Earth Island Institute. Welcome to Ultimate Civics, lessons for teaching foundational civics instruction in our classrooms and our communities. This instruction is actually intended as a guide for you to be able to use the free lesson materials posted here. Lesson 3 focuses on power and internal threats to our power, to people's rule. We actually would normally have a timeline of rights, power, and oppression on display in this room. Instead, we're going to scroll through an overview of all 230 years of our democracy. And as you view this 1-minute video, you're going to be looking for two things. There are 3 different colors. That's one thing. Blue are laws that actually empower people, that recognize human rights. Yellow and orange are colors that disempower people, that infringe or violate human rights. The second thing to look for is, how do these colors repeat throughout this timeline? Do they? Are they in bunches? Is there a pattern? So let's have a look. What you may have noticed as you viewed this timeline was that there are periods where the blue color, the times of empowerment for people, tend to bunch. And there's a sea of sort of yellow and orange on either side of these bunches of blue. So let's explore what's going on. We're going to cover the first 100 years in this lesson, this 2-part lesson, 1789 through 1886. Our essential questions are: what is power and why does it matter? How did the Constitution empower some people and disempower others? What are the 3 branches of government and their intended powers? What branches make law? What is the difference between constitutional rights and charter rights? Person: what did the founders mean? To get started, we're going to talk about power. A lot of the questions were about it. So what is power and why does it matter? Power is the ability to make others do what you would have them do. And specifically, civic power is about working in our communities with our local government to try to influence the decision-making process and shape the outcome of what our society looks like. Power is not usually something that's talked about when people talk about democracy and government, but it's actually what democracy and government is all about. Power governs how any form of government works. Power determines who gets to set up the government, who gets to make the rules that govern people's lives, work, and how we run our government or are run by it. In our society, we don't do a very good job of sharing power. Power is like a teeter-totter, where when one group of people is empowered, another group is disempowered. Learning how power operates is key to being an effective, engaged citizen. In a democracy, it's actually key to making a difference. What is democracy? The literal meaning of the word. If you need some help with that, here's some Greek. It's based on demos, the people, and kratia, power. It literally means the people rule. There are two forms of democracy, direct democracy and a democratic republic. In a direct democracy, it's ruled by the majority. A democratic republic is ruled by citizens through their elected officials, their elected representatives. Our founders gave us a democratic republic. Here's why. Say there are 3 sheep and 1 alpaca in a pasture. In a direct democracy, the 3 sheep think that alpaca looks very scary, even though it's actually very well behaved. The 3 sheep vote to send that alpaca far, far away. The alpaca votes no, it doesn't want to go, but it only has 1 vote. It's the problem with a direct democracy. The minorities have no power to protect themselves. Bring our alpaca back. And in a democratic republic now, the 3 sheep vote again to send the alpaca away. But this time, the alpaca has rights, and it gets to stay. The 3 sheep cannot legally send the alpaca away. It has rights. Okay. So, what are, let's see, the first 3 words to our Constitution? Do I hear it? It's "we the people." Who actually wrote those words? What types of people? This is something we're going to consider in a small group activity using this political cartoon. We're going to interpret this cartoon to help us answer the questions: who did this empower? Who did it disempower, our Constitution? And we'll be using the vocab word Constitution. Every small group has the whole vocab section. This case, Constitution is core concepts and laws made by people by which people agree to be governed. So the facilitated activity here ends with a group discussion. And pretty much what people have realized at this point is that, well, there were a lot of people who were not at the table. In fact, the people at the table only represented 4% of the population at the time. They were rich white males with property. That left 96% of the population kind of out of the Constitution. Constitution disempowered 96% and empowered 4%. The Constitution was written to protect the self-interests of the ruling minority. And the founders managed to institutionalize slavery, and along with it, classism, racism, and sexism, without ever using these words. So there's an external small group activity that examines in more detail in our Constitution the 3/5 clause, the migration and importation clause, and the fugitive laborer clause, to find out how we got kind of off on a very undemocratic process. We are going to look next at a TED Ed film that explores how is power divided in the United States government. We will follow that with a small group activity to discuss the film, and in particular, what are the three branches of government, what are their powers, and what is the system to share power. The small groups will be using the whole entire vocab section of our government. And as we come back, people then share their answers, which is, for starters, the three branches of government. We have the legislative branch, Congress, that makes law, the executive branch composed of the president and cabinet and agencies that enforce the law, and the judiciary branch comprised of the court system. We'll also learn from the film and discussion that there is a system of checks and balances, so that if any one branch of power takes too much power or starts abusing its power, the other two branches can intervene and rein it kind of back in. Failing that, the ultimate check and balance on our system of government is we the people. Now, during the small group activity, people realized in reading the vocabulary that there's actually a big difference between the film and what is actually part of our government. The discovery in the vocab section is that actually all three branches make law. What? This is not what's taught in our schools. This is not certainly what I learned in school, but it's actually the way our government operates. So let's take a look now at the framework of law that underpins our three branches of government. Again, we're going to do a small group activity, and this time we're going to be looking in the vocab law section for these four laws: the administrative law, common law, constitutional law, statutory law. And the idea is in the small groups to match the law to the branch of government that it belongs to. So we work on that for a bit, and we come back, and we're going to start with what's taught in our schools still now. Constitutional law is the highest law of our nation. It defines the roles, power, and structure of government and the basic rights of citizens and other people in society. Statutory laws are written laws passed by Congress. What is not taught is that the rules and regulations made by the executive branch to enforce the laws passed by Congress actually makes up its own set of administrative law. This includes executive orders passed by the president to manage the agencies as they administrate the law. This is actually in part Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution in the Take Care Clause. This is all spelled out. What is also not taught is that common law is judge-made law. Unlike statutory law, judge-made law is exactly that. It's court cases, it's decisions. It's rulings that are based on precedent, the informal rules framed by customs and traditions of a society. These social norms guide people's behavior and attitudes in a society. When an informal rule is broken, people may go to court to settle a dispute. A judge ruling at this point could turn an informal rule into common law. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights were based actually on English common law, dating back to the Magna Carta. For example, in the Bill of Rights, the Seventh Amendment, right to a jury trial, actually mentions and refers to common law twice. Lawyers specialize in all these four branches of law. And it's really important for citizens to understand how to manage our government to understand this legal framework. For example, the youth that are asking Congress for gun control have gone to the legislative branch to demand a new law. The youth that are asking for climate justice for their generation have gone to the judiciary branch to ask for remedy, for relief from harm caused by the administrative law, the rules from the executive branch. So this is key to actually being an effective citizen as well. Now, the founders imagined rule by the people, of, for, and by the people. So this is our ideal sovereign self-governance, where we have we the people, in quotes still, because we know it only referred to part of the population, a very small part. The founders imagined a separation of power line, where there would be distinct duties for the rulers to guide our government. Specifically, the rulers, the people, would be sovereign. We have inalienable rights. And those rights allow people to operate in private spheres like our homes and our other private spaces, free of government interference. The government, on the other hand, is tasked with duties through the Constitution, and it's held accountable to the people. The government operates in a public sphere, ideally, where people come together to identify problems and find remedies for our society. Now, the founders knew that any government had the potential to get corrupted. So this little wolf is a reminder that we must pay attention to what we have created. We use our power to constantly limit and curb the power of our government. Founders, besides creating a government, founders had to decide how to handle corporations, which were present even before our founding. And that is, again, because our law is grounded in English common law dating back to the Magna Carta, and corporations existed. Corporations are creatures of law. It's a group of persons that have a charter to do business. And dating back, actually even predating the Magna Carta, corporations were considered artificial persons under law, for the purposes of law. And that's because when a law said a person shall do this or that, person included both natural persons and artificial persons. The idea was humans and businesses were all supposed to be following the law. Now, there's a small group activity here to dive into the vocabulary and answer these questions. Who grants a charter? What is the difference between a natural person and an artificial person? Between an inalienable right and a charter right? When we come back to discuss this as a group, we discover that charters are actually handed out by state governments. The founders left that duty to the states. Inalienable rights belong to natural persons. They cannot be taken away. They cannot be ignored. Artificial persons are not born. They are created by a charter for a very specific purpose to do business. Charter rights are granted as a privilege of doing business through the charter by a government. Charter rights can be taken away. They can be denied. And so they are definitely considered to be privileges, not actual constitutional rights. Corporations are now the most common form of artificial person in our democracy. But this wasn't always so. For example, nonprofit corporations, such as maybe the Girl Scouts or 4-H Club in the upper and lower corners here of these photos, operate to provide services. For-profit corporations make products. They deliver products, they transport products, they manufacture. And the idea is to get familiar with this a little bit. What to take some time in a small group activity to look at what services or products are provided by natural persons in these photos. And you come back from that and discover all sorts of things, helmets, the glasses, the chili bins. It's just a general overview of what corporations make and provide in our society. Going back to then, there were about 20 large corporations at the time, and they all had royal charters to operate and actually exploit the New World. You might be familiar with some of the names of these corporations: the Colony of Rhode Island, Connecticut Colony, the Province of New York, the Colony and Dominion of Virginia, the Province of Georgia, the East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company. These colonies had charter rights for limited self-governance. They could own property, collect taxes for the crown. They could pass laws, sue or be sued. Some could even quarter soldiers in people's homes during times of peace. This made them very unpopular with the colonies. For example, what was the target of the Boston Tea Party? It was the East India Company. Now, after the American Revolution, things flipped around. The founders and the people in the now states wanted to do business, but under new rules. In Europe, corporations had great wealth and power, and they were huge influence in government. The founders did not want this to happen in the United States. So how did the founders handle these artificial persons? First, we need to understand what the founders meant when they used the word person. The problem is our Constitution does not define this word, but uses it multiple times. So this is a small group inquiry now to determine the answer to this question by reading several statements from our Constitution or our Bill of Rights. Do these statements refer to real persons or artificial persons? Again, small group activity. Here's just a sampling of the statements. In the Constitution, the preamble, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, artificial or natural. And the Bill of Rights is a little bit more cloudy now because we have 230 years of doing something, which maybe wasn't in the original Constitution. And that is that we have to keep in mind the difference between charter rights and natural rights. So our example from the Bill of Rights is the Fourth Amendment, the right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, effects against unreasonable search and seizures. What did the founders mean? And it turns out in our examples and also in the Constitution itself that of all the times that natural persons was mentioned in any form, person, people, posterity, citizen, Indian, witness, it's pretty clear that the founders were referring to actual people, natural persons, not artificial persons. So with that in mind, let's now work to figure out this. Where did founders fit corporations into their conceptual model? Did they put them above the power line, where the rulers are and people are sovereign? Or did they put them below the power line to be ruled by the people? Another little discussion. And the answer, of course, hopefully, is that people figure out the founders wanted these things to be controlled. That was the whole point. They didn't want them acting up like they did in Europe. So below the power line. The way that the founders did this was they decided to leave it to the states, and the states decided to make it an act of granting a charter exactly the same as passing a bill. It had to go through the state legislature. To do that, in a contract, there were rules, and one of the rules was to follow the rule. Some of these rules, for example, were that corporations had to be for a public service. They had to not work and spend money in any way influence election process. They had expiration dates. That's how little trust there was, 5 years, 20 years before their contracts were terminated. They were completely banned from political activity. Corporations that did not play by the rules, their contracts were ended. So every one or thing on the ruled side of this power line was meant to follow the rules. That includes individuals who are in business, a cobbler, a baker, a grocer, as well as the corporation. And again, here's our little wolf to remind us that everything below this line, everything needs to be watched. Well, as we're about to see in the next part 2, the corporations with their royal charters proved very difficult to control, exactly as the founders had feared.